So we've already covered the first three passages, and they were Daniel 2, and also Daniel 7, and also Revelation 13. And those last three passages touched on the times of Gentiles. So we had Daniel 2, where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and where Daniel interpreted that with the head of gold, silver, brass, and then of course legs of iron and mixed with clay. And all of those represented empires over the past years. And the key thing is with the time of Gentiles is that it's a time of period when Jerusalem is under the Gentile control. Now, another thing that's popped up too is that I'm just assuming that everybody knows what a Gentile is, but I guess I better explain that a Gentile, and not assume, is a Gentile from a biblical point of view, is races other than the Jewish nation. Okay, so that's probably the easiest way. So if you're not Jewish, you're pretty much considered a Gentile. So that includes all other races other than the Jewish nation, which is from a biblical point of view. So in this case, in terms of Jerusalem, it's a point of period where it started with the Babylonian period, and it will continue right till the end, until the second coming, is when the time of Gentiles will finish. So it just simply means that Gentile rule will no longer be applicable, even though there is temporary. It doesn't rule out temporary rule. We know that because currently Israel is under its own rule, but that's only temporary because we still have the Antichrist who will come during the tribulation to take over Jerusalem at that point. And then of course the Messiah will return, and Jerusalem will no longer be under the rule of any Gentile dominance. But let's look at Revelation 17, being the fourth passage where we were before. So Revelation 17, verses 7 to 14. The Daniel 2 chapter and the Daniel 7 chapters all basically gave you a summary of the overall timeline of the three Gentile empires, namely the Babylonian, the Medo-Persians, and the Greek Empire, and also then it began with the Fourth Empire. But when it comes to the Revelation passages, it really starts to focus really on the Fourth Empire. So the details of the Fourth Empire is what Revelations 13 and Revelation 17 will start to give us more detail. In other words, it zooms in more on the features of the Fourth Empire, which is the fourth creature in the timeline. In Revelation 17, that what we're going to go through here is really, this passage is really going to focus on the seven heads. And it's talking about the seven heads of this beast, and it's the same beast that's found in Revelation 13, and it's also the same beast as the fourth beast of Daniel 7. So, and this beast has 10 horns and 7 heads. Now, we already know what the 10 horns represent, and that should have been explained previously. Basically, the 10 horns represent the 10 kingdoms, or the fourth stage of the Fourth Empire, or the 10 division stage. So what we're going to explain next is that what the actual 7 heads represent. Now, when we read verse 8 of Revelation 17, that really is just going in regards to what happened to the death and resurrection of the Antichrist. And then also it describes how the people worshipped him at this point. But we won't discuss that part. That part will be later talked in detail in chapter 11 of the Footsteps of Messiah. And that's more to do with the events of the mid-tribulation. So we're only really going to focus on the parts that's referring to the times of Gentiles in terms of this passage here. But let's read verses 9 and then verse 10. So, in verse 9, here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So here, I mentioned before, this verse 9, unfortunately, most have stopped here at verse 9 and pretty much ignored the following verse. There's been a conclusion that this, when it talks about the 7 heads and the 7 mountains, this has often been interpreted as to represent Rome. Okay, so I think there's people still trying to log on, Lonnie? Yeah, they're probably on the other, they might be on the wrong one, but we'll carry on. Anyway, yeah, so some have often, well, most actually, have stopped here at verse 9 and interpreted this as the 7 mountains representing Rome. Literally because Rome is the city that sits on 7 hills. But from Arnold's notes here, he's stating that there are a number of other cities in the Middle East that also claim this, that also would sit upon 7 hills or mountains. So this would be, somebody keeps, oh, Tina's in. And who else is in it? Okay. So if you're just joining us, we're just going over, finishing off the 4th passage, which deals with the Times of Gentiles, and that's Revelations 17, and we're up to verse 9. So that verse 9 again is a one that's often been interpreted as the Rome, but when you read the next verse, it actually gives away that it's not dealing with, it's dealing with 7 kings. So it should be viewed as 7 kings rather than as just one, rather than just Rome on its own. So that's what it's meant, because if you read the next verse, and they are 7 kings, the 5 are fallen, the one is, the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a little while. Okay, so in verse 10, that's what it gives. It gives the the answer to what the 7 heads are. Okay, so there are 7 kings. Now remember the word mountain, it's a symbol that's used for represent kings, and so it's consistent how it's used here. So it shouldn't be taken any other way. So the meaning of mountains here is consistent with its symbolic usage elsewhere in the scriptures. So while both the 10 horns and 7 heads are representative of the kings, there is a difference between them. The 10 horns are kings that are contemporary with each other. So what that means is the 10 horns rise up at the same time. So that's kind of referring to the 10 division stage of that timeline, whereas the 7 heads is more of a chronological or sequential order. So it follows one after the other in a chronological sequence. So that's where the 7 heads here, where Revelation 17, because that's not something that was revealed in the Daniel chapters, but here in Revelation 17, John is given a little bit more detail on that, and so 7 heads is what we're going to try and explain today and what that means. The 6th head, Mountain King, was present, and he's in control, and there was one more to go. Basically, those 7 heads can be described as this is the development stage. So you know how we've gone through the 3 empires. So the first empire was Babylon. Second empire was the bear, which was the Medo-Persia period. And the third empire was the Hellenistic Greek. Now the 4th empire is, now that we know, is of course the imperialism empire, and that's when Rome started off. So Rome is not the name of this empire, but it starts off the Fourth Empire. Now, from the Third Empire, so the seven heads represent the stages before it becomes the Fourth Empire. First, 5 heads, it says 5 are fallen. Up to this point that John is writing this, he would have been just at the start of the 6th stage of the Fourth Empire. But so that's what he's talking about. So the 5 that has fallen is that there were 5 previous stages of the Roman Empire before it became the United stage. Okay, so before it became the Fourth Empire, there were 5 other kings that were in those stages leading up to the Fourth Empire. So the first one was the Tarquin kings. So that's the first head that it's talking about in Revelation. So Tarquin kings is the first head, and they started in 753 BC. And then the second head is called the Councillors. That's the second head. Then the third head was the plebeians, or dictators, and that's the third head. And then there it developed into the republicans, or the decimers. So that's the fourth head of the Roman Empire phase. And then later on it became the triumvirate. I was going to say Trump, but triumvirate. And that's the fifth head. So those are the 5 heads. So of the 7 heads, those are the 5 early ones that that passage talks about. 5 have fallen. So remember, John is writing this. Those five figureheads or kings have already been and gone, and so then it arrives at the 6th head. Okay, so now we're at the 6th head, which is the Fourth Empire. So after the Greek Empire, there is 5 stages before it developed into the Fourth Empire. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's basically what Revelation is describing here in terms of the 7 heads of the Revelation of 17, 7, and 14. We arrive at the 6th head, which is the Fourth Empire. So the 6th head is the Fourth Empire that we're in, and Rome starts off that stage. But there's still one more head to come, which is the 7th head, and that one head to come is the Antichrist. Okay, so 5 heads have fallen. The 6th head is the head of imperialism, which is the Fourth Empire. That's the one that we're in now, that now exists. And there is one head yet still to come, and that head is the Antichrist. Now there is an alternative view other than the 5 heads that is mentioned here in regards to the Roman stage. The alternative view is that, those 5 heads that we talked about earlier. So the alternative view is that there could be Egypt, is the first head, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and then Greece. And then Rome is the 6th, and then the Antichrist is destined to be the 7th. So that's the alternative view to this. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, and then Rome being the 6th. Of course, the Antichrist is the 7th head. So these heads are sequential and chronological, so they come one after the other. And so in that verse there, so let's look at that verse. So verse 10, and they are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, one is the other, has not yet come, and when he comes he must remain a little while. And then verse 11, the beast which was and is not is himself. Of course that's an 8th, and is one of the 7th, and he goes to destruction. And so so the Antichrist is contemporary with the 7, making him an 8th. So he's an 8th contemporary king ruling over the other 7 kings who have submitted to his authority. So when the other kings that he's taken out, remember out of the 10 he takes out 3, leaving the 7, and of course he's the 8th. That's what it means there, but he's still of the 7. So the term 7 refers to the heads, while the term 8 refers to the horns. Now the word beast in the book of Revelation is a reference to the empire of imperialism in its final stage, which is the 5th stage, and that's the Antichrist stage. So that's what the word beast in Revelation would mean. It's the 5th stage, or the Antichrist stage. So in verses 12 to 13, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but they received authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. And in verse 13, and these have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So the 10 horns that are stated are the 10 kings, yet of course to exist in the future, way beyond John's time. And in verse 13, they surrender the authority to the Antichrist. And of course we'll study these details later in the chapters. But obviously these remaining 7 kings put their whole allegiance under the Antichrist, and so the Antichrist effectively becomes the one ring that rules all, I guess, is the common term there. So this is after taking out the other 3. And in verse 18, these have one mind, and they give their power and authority unto the beast, and that's what it's confirmed there. In verse 14, then we see, of course, the 4th empire is finally destroyed by the Messiah himself. So in verse 14, they shall war against the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they also shall overcome that are with them, called and chosen and faithful. So the passage that we've just covered is the Revelation 17, and basically that passage really is really describing what those 7 heads are. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So you may have to review this video and listen to it again. But Revelation 17 is a passage that's referring to the what those 7 heads are. Okay, so that's what it's detailing in, which is not revealed in the other passages. But here it gives us details of what the 7 heads of Revelation are. So that concludes that part in terms of the last chapter 2. If you go through your study guide notes, hopefully you'll be able to, it becomes clearer when you actually go through those questions. I'll help you to be clearer on some of the things that we've discussed. But that's something to chew on.